what makes it very dangerous is the fact that it's very virile, meaning that it lasts. It doesn't need a lot of water and fluids or nutrients to survive. So anthrax could last on an item, for example, for decades.
Oh, wow.
So that's one of the things that makes it a very a weapon that is would be used by bioterrorists. Part of the number one, because again, it's easy to obtain because it's a naturally occurring disease, and you can find it in soil, and it has a lot of virulence.
How can I help? How can I be useful in ending needless suffering? Do not be afraid of work that has no end.
We have to organize a social movement.
We have an opportunity to lead by example versus just talking, hot air. I think the more people in this fight, the more we grow. Eventually it could change. The people are the ones that can make the change.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Change Agents, an Ironclad original presented by Firecracker Farm. This episode is about the work of Stephen Philip Monteiro, a former Secret Service special agent and expert on bioterrorism. Stephen is a Navy veteran and was trained in cryptology. He's an expert in law enforcement, security, forensics, intelligence, and bioterrorism. He served as the senior advisor to the Director of Weapons of Mass Destruction Intelligence for the DHS focusing on bioterrorism, and he is the author of the book, The Gray Bird of Baghdad, an ex-Secret Service agent's desperate mission to save an Iraqi scientist. You know, we were talking about the Secret Service. What led you into that pathway? I mean, you worked in that job for 2 decades.
Yeah, it's kind of funny because ever since I was a kid, I wanted to be a cop. That was my thing. I got kind of struck with it early on, and it happened because one day my mom sent me to the laundromat to pick up some clothes that we had clean. Our washing machine broke down anyway, so we had a storm the night before, and there's a lot of snow and ice. And I'm a little kid. I'm walking back with all these clothes. I slip and fall. Everything breaks open. Everything goes every place. The wind is blowing all the clothes all over. It's a mess. And I'm half crying, because I know my mother's going to kill me when I get home. So this car pulls up. These two big dudes get out, and they got long jackets, and they got the boots, and I see the badges. So it was the cops, and they proceed to start helping me fold these clothes, and they're running after them, picking them up in the street and getting me all squared away. They put me in the car. They take me home. Of course, my mother sees the car pull up, and she's like, "What did you do?" I said, "I didn't do anything." But after that, it was like, you know what? That's what I want to do. I want to be those guys. So that's kind of it. So it hit me early on in my life, and so I did. I became a police officer. I was a detective, and then I eventually morphed into the Secret Service from there. But yeah, something I've always wanted to do.
Where were you working when you were a detective?
I was Concord, New Hampshire.
Okay. And then before that, I mean, your pathway is fascinating. I'm sure we'll get into it. But so military time, cryptology, which
Cryptologist, yeah.
has almost nothing to do with being a law enforcement officer. To my
No.
understanding, being a law enforcement officer, into the Secret Service, and then, senior advisor to the Director of Weapons of Mass Destruction and Intelligence. I mean, you were hitting some extreme lefts and rights. I think it's
Yeah, it was
fascinating.
crazy.
So I'm assuming military before your time as a detective.
Yes, yes, yes. Yeah, so I went in the military, and of course, you take all the exams, and they tell you what they want you to do. And so I was assigned to you don't get to make that choice. At
Yeah.
least I didn't.
Yeah.
So I was assigned to be a cryptologist in the O branch, and it was great. I enjoyed it. I learned a lot of responsibility for an 18-year-old kid, and so yeah, it was great. It set me on a good path because you had to grow up real fast. Because in my house, my dad didn't have enough money to send us to college, so it was like when I graduated from high school, he said, "So what are your plans? What are you going to do?" So the next thing I know, we're sick, and I promised to support and defend the Constitution. So that's how it happened for me. And but yeah, but law enforcement is always something I wanted to do.
What was the transition like working from a state agency and lateraling over to becoming a Secret Service agent? How did that process work for you?
Oh, it worked pretty smoothly, because I had worked with the feds before. I'd worked with the FBI on criminal cases, and so I knew how they operated. work with the DEA a lot on cases. I did undercover work, and so it wasn't a great transition for me. There was things that were different, no doubt about it. Their approach to crime is a lot to enforcement of federal laws is different than what we do on the state level. They certainly had a lot more resources than we did. And they could certainly take their time on investigations where, when I was working burglaries, I could only have so much time to work them before another stack came in. So, but on the Fed side, you can kind of pick and choose what investigations you want to follow through. You work with a U.S. attorney from the very beginning. You've got a lot of resources. I remember one time we had this undercover thing, and we had so many people out there. I'm like, God, this is crazy. I used to go and pick up people on a murder warrant by myself, or maybe with another guy. This is insane. But that's the beauty of the feds. They just have a lot more to bring to the table when you're conducting criminal investigations. So that was kind of a plus.
Yeah. What roles, give me the wave tops before we kind of dive into, I want to focus on, bioterrorism specifically.
Sure.
Give me the wave tops of what your career looked like while you were at the Secret Service from day one until when you got out.
Yeah. So I was assigned to the Boston field office. That's where I that's my first assignment when I got hired. And normally you're assigned to the criminal side of things, to conducting criminal investigations. So I started out in a check squad. So we had government checks that were stolen and so forth and falsified. So I was in that squad at the very beginning. And then I went through all the different squads, counterfeit squad and everything else, and protective intelligence. And there's a whole bunch of different levels there. And also I was chosen to be a polygraph examiner, which was awesome. I loved it. Conducting polygraph examinations and interviews and interrogations, not only through the United States, but all over the world. So I enjoyed that. That took up a lot of my time. And there's a lot of travel associated with that. So I did the whole myriad of criminal work, and then obviously some protection as well. But that's where it started. And then I was assigned. I left Boston and went to Washington D.C. and got assigned to our intelligence division. So I did that for 2 years. I did domestic intelligence work and then foreign intelligence work, and I was responsible for Sub-Saharan Africa, all the countries under the desert, and part of Central America and South America. That was under my purview. And then I got assigned to the president's detail after that. So with Bill Clinton. So I did that for a few years, worked at the White House, and then became an instructor at our academy. And then eventually I went to congressional affairs and worked up on Capitol Hill as a congressional fellow for a couple of years, and then got assigned to forensics after that. So it was good. It was good.
What does that mean to be a congressional fellow? What is that job?
Yeah, well, what a congressional fellow is a program where they take government employees and they assign them to Congress to get an understanding of how things work, what we need to be aware of, and also to be a proponent for your agency as well. So it's a learning program, and I worked for a congressman, worked in the House, and I also worked in the Senate, and I also worked on one of the subcommittees, Treasury Postal. So it was a great learning experience to see how Congress works, or in many cases does not work. Yeah. And it was a behind-the-scenes look at how things are done up there. And it really, Andy, it's an eye-opener. It's an eye-opener. And so I did that for a couple of years, and that was a great opportunity. And then when I got transferred out of congressional affairs, I went to forensics.
Ladies and gentlemen, today's episode is brought to you by Firecracker Farms. A question for you, perhaps it's too personal. Do you like things hot? I'm talking about your food. I'm actually talking about seasoning, in this case, specifically salt. Specifically, Firecracker Farm hot salt. I never thought salt could be, I guess the word would be dynamic. So Firecracker Farms, they're made with Ghost, Scorpion, and Carolina Reaper peppers. The flavor is ridiculously delicious, and everything you put it on gets better. It isn't too hot. If you're familiar with peppers, those 3 that I listed, they're spicy, but this is a choose your own adventure. The first time that I tried this salt, I put it on a ribeye steak, my personal favorite. I didn't really know what to expect because I've salted steaks many times before, but holy cow, this is the only thing I have put on any steak that I have made since that day. Firecracker Farm is a very small family brand. It's just the founder, Alex, and his family going all in on a great product and supporting great causes, like Operation 300 and the Pipe Hitter Foundation, with a percentage of every sale. Alex has been legitimately bugging me to be a sponsor of Change Agents for a while now. And here's what I can wholeheartedly say. His product is, in fact, awesome. It's not as good as you might think it is. It's better. So go get some while you can at firecracker.farm. Use code Ironclad to get 15% off your first order at firecracker.farm. When you were at Forensics, is that when you started focusing more on bioterrorism, or where did that start hitting your radar?
Well, you know, bioterrorism was always something that the Secret Service was very concerned with in our protective mission, defending against biological and chemical weapons. So that was always part of our protocol, and we have countermeasures in place for that. So there was always a connection to that. But my real work with bioterrorism started after I actually retired from the federal government and came back as a consultant and was assigned to the science and technology director. That's when it really started. But we always had a nexus to that, just because of our protective mission.
What year did you leave government service, even though contracting is essentially government service through
It is, yeah. Yeah, I retired from the Secret Service. You just get paid better, you're right. Yeah, I retired from the Secret Service in December of 2005.
Okay.
Mhm.
Totally aside, did you ever cross paths with another polygrapher named Evie Pompouris?
Yes, she worked for me. I was her boss.
I
Yeah,
have become
yeah.
friends with her over the years. I have a personal podcast. I've hosted her twice. She is a fascinating, ferocious, 3'11" tall person.
Yeah, yeah, she was good. She was one of our good examiners, and yeah, she worked for me. She was out of the
Okay.
New York office. She was one of my polygraph guys because at that point, I was I was the deputy special agent in charge of forensics, and then I moved up to the special agent in charge, and she worked for me. Yeah, awesome.
Okay. Well, I figured it was a small world. I can't.
Yeah,
I
it
mean,
is. It is. Yeah,
I'm sure there are quite a few polygraph people, but the odds that they didn't know each other. Okay, so that's cool.
yeah, yeah.
Okay, so pre 9/11, how much concern was there, at least what you would hear inside the Secret Service, about counterterrorism or bioterrorism? Obviously, post 9/11, it was plastered everywhere.
Sure.
Pre 9/11, though, how often would you guys hear about those things?
Not very often. Matter of fact, not at all, really. I can't recall any specific programs, meetings, or efforts that were going on in terms of that. Now, again, as I mentioned, we were always concerned about bioweapons and
Yep.
chemical weapons being used, and we had our protocols and countermeasures. But that was pretty much it. It was pretty silent at that point, and it was post 9/11 where everything just went crazy and got kicked into gear regarding bioterrorism. Yeah.
Would you consider, and I'm trying to remember the exact details on this, and I'm sure you'll have the specifics, but I swear that there were members, was it of Congress getting, it wasn't anthrax, or was it? There were powder, envelopes being delivered with powder to the DC area.
Sure. Yeah, that was the anthrax case,
Okay.
which was codenamed the Meritorious case, and it wound up being one of the most involved, long, and expensive investigations ever conducted in our nation's history. It lasted 10 years. So this was an attack, a biological attack that happened shortly after 9/11.
Yeah.
And anthrax was mailed to a couple of senior government officials, to U.S. senators, as well as to news organizations, and it resulted in the deaths of 5 people, and many others got sickened by it. And it was our first, serious biological attack that happened in this country. So it caught us by surprise, because we were not only concerned about anthrax, we were concerned about other biological weapons. And of course, at that time, we weren't certain whether or not it was connected to 9/11, whether the same people behind it were behind this effort. And we were worried about what other biological agent, could be released. We had no clue as to who it was, when they might strike again, how they might strike, and that lasted for quite a long time before they kind of zeroed in on who was responsible for this. But yeah, it took us by surprise because we were totally, woefully inadequate in terms of our abilities to deter and detect and defend against biological attacks at that point. So we had to really catch up.
Ladies and gentlemen, if you want to get into elite shape, or perhaps just make improvements to your current level of fitness, check out the Mountain Tough digital training program. You can try it for free for 14 days, and you can see the results for yourself. The app allows users to train wherever they are with minimal equipment requirements, whether you're in the gym or you're outdoors or you're at home. Users can access top-tier programming that fits into their lifestyle. The Mountain Tough app offers expertly designed progressive training plans that guide users from start to finish. These plans are tailored to build resilience, strength, and endurance over time, preventing burnout and injury. The app features self-guided and follow-along coaching videos, allowing users to be coached through every workout step by step. This helps to ensure proper form, motivation, and intensity, regardless of the user's fitness level. The Mountain Tough app delivers training programs built for the unique physical demands of mountain athletes, including hunters, tactical professionals, and outdoor adventurers. The programs themselves are designed by seasoned strength and conditioning experts, elite athletes, and military veterans. Start your 14-day free trial today and check out the results for yourself. And be sure to use the offer code CHANGEAGENTS, and I'm looking at it as one word, at sign-up, and you can get 40% off your annual subscription. Remember, use the offer code CHANGEAGENTS at checkout. 10-year investigation. I mean, obviously, I want everybody to cross their T's and dot their I's. A decade is a very thorough investigation without obviously revealing any type of sensitive techniques or procedures. How do you reverse engineer that and determine, were they able to determine where it came from? I never actually heard of the resolution of that particular incident.
Sure. It took a long time because it just was not a lot of leads to go by. And one of the first things they did was obviously examine the anthrax spores themselves to determine where they may have been originated, how they were made, the sophistication that was involved in making these spores, because this was anthrax that was weaponized. It was created to deliberately, hurt or kill someone.
Mm.
And so one of the first things they did forensically was to examine the envelopes and examine what was left over, the residue that was in there. And there was a lot of conflicting information among the scientists themselves as to the level of sophistication that would be required to make this. Some people were saying, well, you could, $2,500 and a couple of books and you could do this. And others were like, no, there's a lot more going on here. This thing has been weaponized. We think this silica has been added to it and other things. So, which would it really take someone with a lot of skill to do it. So there was a lot of going back and forth in the early days as to how this could have happened. And eventually, it was they honed in on a scientist up at Fort Detrick in Maryland, which is the home of USAMRIID, which is a military organization that deals with infectious diseases. He was a scientist up there. His name was Bruce Ivins, and they honed in on him. A lot of circumstantial evidence, but there's still a lot of doubt among the scientists themselves and that worked up there that he was responsible for it.
Really?
They said there's just no way he could have done this without us knowing about it. We don't think there's a good enough link between the samples they found in his laboratory and what was found on the envelope. So there's still a lot of issues going on. But we were never able to really resolve it because Bruce Ivins killed himself just before he was getting ready to get indicted on this. So the FBI, the prosecutors closed the case in 2011. We've not had any attacks like that since. So I guess you can make the assumption that he was. But officially, in my opinion, the case is still unresolved and open.
Wow. No, I certainly hadn't heard the tail end of that story.
Yeah.
Okay, so post government service, you're at the Secret Service. Explain to me how you got into this bioterrorism role that you found yourself. Bioterrorism and weapons of mass destruction, which, let's be honest, after 9/11, they were at the forefront of most people's minds as opposed to September 10th.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, when I retired, like everybody else, I was looking for opportunities in the DC area. So I sent out my resume. I'd gone on some interviews and that type of thing. So I got a call from this company one day. They invite me in for an interview. So I wasn't even sure how they got my resume. I don't remember submitting it, but nonetheless, they had it. So they said, we're looking for someone with your skill set. Okay, that's a good start. And so, we talked about the company, we talked about their benefits, we talked about what they offer. And it was a well-known government consulting company, Booz Allen. So they were well respected and they did a lot of government work. So I knew of them. But it was interesting, Andy, because during these interviews, we kept talking about, what the company would offer me and that I'm a right fit, but they never told me exactly what they want me to do, which
Nice.
was always yes. And I was like, really? I'd never gone on an interview like that before. So I was scratching my head. So, I figured, well, it might be a classified program and they can't say much. So that was kind of my first thoughts about it. So I went home and I talked it over with my wife and I said, that the pay is pretty good and it's a good company and good opportunities and I could stay at home and all this other stuff. So, she said, yeah, let's go for it. And if you don't like it, you can always leave. So I took the job on a leap of faith, but I would caution your listeners never to take a job on a leap of faith without knowing what you're supposed to do. It just creates all kinds of issues. But anyway, I did that. And it wasn't until about 2 weeks later that they invited me in and opened up this government safe and took out this classified document and said, "Go back to your desk and read this, and this will tell you what we want you to do." And that's how it started. Yeah.
And before that, I mean, no training on WMD, bioweapons. I mean, this sounds like it might have been a little bit of a education by garden hose once you started this new
Yeah,
job.
it was pretty much like that. I mean, I had some knowledge of chemical weapons and bioweapons, just begin again because of the connection with the Secret Service, but not a lot of in-depth involvement in those or those types of investigations. So yeah, it was definitely a water hose type of situation. And my job basically was to to find this guy and bring him in and set up an environment where he'd be willing to talk with us. So that's how it happened. It was just taking a job on a leap of faith and finding out later what they want me to do. So I specifically remember the date. It was January 12th, 2006. My team and I had two other guys working with me, set out to find this missing scientist. 2.5 years later, we were successful. And my book, The Gray Bird of Baghdad, is the story of those 2.5 years.
Yeah, I want to get into your book, but we're going to end on that one because first we're going to talk about bioterrorism and we're going to talk about let's just scare the shit out of people. That's my goal.
Absolutely, man.
Okay. How hard would it be, given your knowledge and understanding, for a terrorist organization or a nation state to manufacture a bioweapon?
Not difficult at all.
Yes, now we're
yes,
starting to
not difficult. Oh, you're scaring me now, Andy. But
I mean,
yeah, no,
it's a real threat, and it's not something I think people think about a lot. And if something were like this were to get let off the chain, I think the consequences would be massive and cascading.
oh, without a doubt, without a doubt. So after the anthrax attacks, we really started taking this seriously because we were really concerned because we just didn't have the right programs in place to defend against these types of things. So we started all kinds of bio programs, but it really hit us after those attacks how vulnerable we really were. And so when you're asking me, is it difficult for a nation state, state actors to do this? No, not at all. They all have bio programs. Most of them do. Most of them had bio programs, including Iraq. So they're there. They're out there. And these people are dealing with some very dangerous viruses and pathogens and bacterium, and is a big concern. So in the 2000s, after the anthrax attacks, and again, we didn't know if it was state sponsored or not, so we were very concerned about that. Uh, we really started to kick into gear and started getting concerned about bio programs, and that's when I got involved in it and started to again drink from that fire hose to try to increase my knowledge base and get involved in working on bioterrorism across the board, but also on this particular case. But yeah, it is a big concern. And back then, bioterrorism was our number one security concern. It was the top of the list. Now that has been replaced and supplanted by cyber. Because bad guys have figured out, hey, we can do a lot of damage at the end of a keyboard. So, and I'm not saying that it's a bad thing cyber is being focused on now because it is important and it is our number one concern. But my concern is that we've sort of taken maybe our eyes off the bioterrorism issue, and that's concerning to me because they're out there and people can make these things.
Yeah, and I want to give the listeners some idea of the size, scope, and scale of how bad this could go. I don't want to give anybody ideas, but can you talk about maybe even broadly some of the worst case scenarios that the government is at least or entities are kicking their heads their ideas around in their heads of, if this happens, we could potentially do this. Like, what does worst case scenario look like?
Well, the worst case scenario is what we just went through with COVID-19. There's a lot of parallels to that. Now, the virus, I mean, COVID viruses have been around, but there's no doubt that this one that we're dealing with, COVID-19, came from the Wuhan lab. The Chinese won't admit that, but that's a fact. Um, and so I kind of think about that in other talks that I've given about this, that there's a lot of parallels because you could see what happened there and how quickly that virus spread around the world. I mean, the latest calculations, Andy, are that worldwide 14 million people have died from COVID-19. Hundreds of millions have been sickened from that. The social impact, we're still dealing with that today.
Yeah.
And the economic impact from COVID-19, I couldn't even calculate the economic impact. So that was our worst case scenario back then about, some disease getting out, like, for example, Ebola or any of the hemorrhagic fevers or, um, you know, uh, uh, the bubonic plague or smallpox or a number of viral and bacteriums could get out there. So we were worried about mass casualties and how quickly this thing is spread. And of course, that's what we went through in COVID-19. I'm not suggesting that COVID-19 was a deliberate release. I don't believe that's the case at all. I think it was accidental. The Chinese were messing around with a BSL-4 facility that they just didn't have the ability to, the proper training, and I think it was an accidental release. But the point is that whether it's a deliberate release or an accidental release, the results are the same. Lots of sick and dead people. So that was our concern, and that's our concern today.
People should, in the interest of them getting their own information, I highly recommend people research the Wuhan lab and the funding for it and the training for scientists, and do the information, search it on your own, because that way neither you nor I can be accused of being biased. And I think that it's always more powerful when people stumble across the information, but just spend some time researching that laboratory, where the money came from, where the samples may have came from. I mean, I've done podcasts with people talking about how the Canadian government, I believe it was Ebola, they sent the Ebola virus over there in vials on a commercial airliner to Wuhan so they could, it's crazy. And people
Sure,
do their own
sure.
research. But there are biolabs like that. I don't know if they're all over the world. You probably have a better understanding, but how do U.S. intelligence organizations monitor the work of these labs to make sure that they aren't weaponizing or creating viruses like this? Or is there even any mechanism to do so? Or are they just an insulated island of, hey, we hope nothing goes wrong? Or do we do the best we can to try to make sure that they're not being malicious in their activities?
Sure. We do have, biosurveillance programs in place where our medical personnel and scientific personnel are in contact with their counterparts around the world to exchange information and so forth. But that only works if you've got a government willing to give up their information. And when you have countries like Russia, who's had bio programs in the past, China, North Korea, no, we're not going to get that information. They're going to tell us what they want, and that's it.
Yeah.
So yeah, it is a challenge when you're trying to monitor what's going on in these laboratories around the world. It only works if they're willing to cooperate with us and give us the information that we're looking for. Otherwise, these programs are clandestine, they're kept in secret, and we really have no way of knowing it. Now, we actually had in 1972 signed treaties with a number of countries, not only to prevent the use of these types of weapons, but also research in them. But that was just on paper.
Yeah.
It still continued, despite the treaty being signed in 1972. That stuff still went on. So Iraq had programs, Russia, China, North Korea, all of them.
Yeah. I was listening to a podcast the other day, and they were talking about, again, the host and the guest had a very high level of certainty that the COVID-19 virus was in fact modified by humans. They also didn't
Yes.
think it necessarily was an intentional release. But what they brought to the forefront was that not every country went after an mRNA vaccine solution. And there's a lot of data coming out now about, and don't want to develop vaccine hesitancy in anybody or anything like that, but the mRNA, given what it had been previously used for and its use on humans and how it can modify the immune system of humans, whereas a lot of countries in the first world went for that type of vaccine, China avoided the MNRA approach, which it depends on how far you back out. The theory that they were talking about was that it was not accidental that they avoided the MNRA approach, because in doing so, if there were changes to the immune system of the people who went through the MNRA process, and then a country like China went a different direction, they would be then less susceptible to something that could intentionally be released later on down the road. It was this very interesting view of maybe the release was accidental, but the treatment and approach to what happened afterwards may not have been, from a very high level strategic approach.
No, that's an interesting conversation, and certainly we'd love to find out the
Yeah.
answers to that. But China, given being China, it's speculation on our part whether that was what they were thinking about at the time, because they've just not been open and honest about this, and that's a big concern for us, going forward. And I'm not sure that we'll ever find out the true story behind COVID and what happened after the fact. So
Yeah, I don't think you're ever going to get anybody to actually stand up and say, "Oops, oh,
no,
my bad.
no.
Just wanted to have a PB&J sandwich. I forgot to sanitize, and sorry, everybody."
Yeah, sure. And that's true. I have no idea what their biosafety or biosecurity protocols were, and we won't find out. And that's the big concern to me, because if we have people doing this gain of function research, in which, gain of function research has been going on for quite some time, where they try to get ahead of a virus, because viruses can morph, they can change, and so you try to get ahead of it by taking that virus and genetically modifying it to make it worse, and then come up with vaccines to fight that. So that's been going on for quite some time, and I'm not. There's camps on both sides that say, hey, listen, we need to do this because we need to get ahead of the curve. We can't, if something spreads out there, we can't start developing a vaccine because of the lag time it takes to get these things operational. So we need to get ahead of it. And the other camp says, well, you're modifying a virus and making it a hell of a lot more dangerous.
Yeah.
So, you've got both people arguing that, yeah, that's true, but if we don't do this, we're going to be behind trying to develop these vaccines after, 10 million people have already died. So, that's still going on right now. And that was part of that situation with Fauci and that whole group, where they wanted to kind of keep this thing quiet, because they didn't want to affect gain of function research that was going on in other places and have all the funding dried up. If they found out that that was going on, that Congress would come in and stop all that going on everywhere. So that was one of their concerns.
It's a fascinating chicken or egg conversation.
Sure. Yeah.
It's hard to say that either camp is completely wrong, because there's essence of truth on both sides. Probably depends on the size of check that you're getting for your funding. I think that would probably sway the needle.
You think?
I am not a smart person, but I've seen enough things in my life at this point that motivation, if you find the right spark for people, it's amazing the activity that you can compel from them. I guess
Oh, absolutely. Well, think about this. These are scientists, right? This is what they do. It's just like being just being a warrior, right? You want to go fight. That's what you're trained to do. So these guys want to get into all of this stuff. They don't want any of their research to be curtailed or taken back. And I'm not saying that gain of function research hasn't been, helpful. It has, getting ahead of things.
Yeah.
But it's risky. It's really risky. And I think the COVID-19 brought that home to us as to how risky it can be. So I think that, one of our concerns is to really understand who's doing this type of research, where it's happening, what are they working on, and to make sure that their biosafety, biosecurity programs are in place, and they have the capabilities and the right training to work in this environment.
What's going on, everyone? This episode is also brought to you by Allegiance Gold. Gold prices have surged, reaching nearly $2,500, a 20% increase in under a year. With traditional investments under scrutiny, gold and other precious metals have become attractive alternatives. The rise in gold prices reflects growing skepticism towards conventional investments and highlights its stability. Notably, even banks are increasing their gold reserves, underlying its lasting value. Gold isn't just a short-term play, it's a long-term strategy for financial security and growth. Whether you're an experienced investor or just starting, gold should be a part of your investment portfolio. Start securing your financial future with Allegiance Gold, a trusted leader in precious metals
With top ratings from TrustLink and an A-plus accreditation from the Better Business Bureau, Allegiance Gold can help you protect your IRA or 401k with physical gold and silver, or delivers precious metals securely to your doorstep. If that sounds interesting to you and you go to protectwithandy.com today, listeners will get an exclusive lowest price on the market for select gold bars. That is protectwithandy.com, or you can call 844-790-9191 to talk to an account representative.
Order now, the two women who were killed and found dismembered in Juarez on Sunday were from El Paso.
On the southern border, there is a legal concept known as reasonable fear, a lifeline for those fleeing violence.
A Texas couple was found tortured and murdered.
Police say so far this month, 11 women have been killed in Juarez.
And then their bodies or body parts offered up to Santa Muerte as an offering. She represents death.
In this special Borderland docuseries, I take a deep dive onto true crime stories. Join me as we uncover the truth about the fear behind the crisis.
This was a group of powerful people.
Never been seen before in Mexico.
Evidence of ritualistic elements.
We ended up rescuing almost 200 kids.
The discovery of multiple women in mass graves.
They're almost in every state.
When you put it together, you have an economic extortion map.
But even more violent.
Watch Reasonable Fear, a special 4-episode docuseries starting Tuesday, September 24th, everywhere you get your podcasts, and on YouTube at This Is Ironclad.
Let's dive into the book over your left shoulder, The Gray Bird of Baghdad, because this ties directly into what you were doing post 9/11 anyway, and what you were doing post your Secret Service career. So give it to me. A 2.5-year search for a missing Iraqi microbiologist. Take it away.
Yeah, okay. So as I mentioned, I had no idea when I got hired for the job that this is what they wanted me to do. But as I mentioned, 2 weeks later, I found it out. And, so it was like a needle in a haystack. So it gave me information, and I had a name and I had a photograph. And at the beginning, that was pretty much it. And just started to have to do this work. And of course, at the time, it was a classified program, so I knew some things, but not all, which is typical in a classified program. You're only told what you need to know, and not the whole picture. So I didn't have the whole picture at that time as to why he was so important. But my mission was to find him, and I knew it was related to a biological attack in the U.S., and the person had information that was vital to helping to stop that. Because again, our programs were just so lacking at that time, that finding this person was essential and a priority, and that was the task I was given. So, like anything else, you start at the very beginning and start doing your detective gumshoe work, and of course, a lot of this stuff was happening while I was in D.C. trying to use a 10,000-mile long screwdriver to figure these things out, and but gradually I started to to develop some inroads and just do investigative work, because I didn't know it at the time, but the guy that I was searching for had been released from prison. Of course, if he was still in prison, my job would have been a lot easier, but he had been released and went into hiding, which made it more difficult to try to track him down.
Where he been imprisoned? Yeah,
he was in Camp Cropper.
Okay.
He got housed there. Yeah. So what happened with him was he led the anthrax program for Iraq. So he had a lot of knowledge about anthrax, and we were very concerned about obtaining low-level production techniques, because we're aware that anthrax could be made in a laboratory by a scientist with some sophistication. But what our concern was how could a couple of terrorists who rent out an apartment in Hoboken, New Jersey, cook this stuff up? Yeah. What would be the telltale signs? What would be the signatures? What would be looking for? And has the ability to make anthrax been lowered, where if someone with minimal skills could actually do this? So that was one of our concerns, is to find out about low-level production techniques. And this guy that we were looking for, Thamer Imran, the scientist, led their program and was a person we felt had that type of knowledge to help us understand this. And of course, we wanted to download him for everything else that they were doing over there in terms of their bio program. So I was sent to find him.
Can you explain a little bit why anthrax is so dangerous, like the mechanism of what it actually does?
Well, anthrax is a fairly common bacterium that's found in soil, so it's not uncommon. Cows get it. Humans don't come into contact with it that much. But what makes it very dangerous is the fact that it's very viral, meaning that it lasts. It doesn't need a lot of water and fluids or nutrients to survive. So anthrax could last on an item, for example, for decades.
Oh, wow.
So that's one of the things that makes it a very a weapon that is would be used by bioterrorists. Part of the number one, because again, it's easy to obtain because it's a naturally occurring disease, and you can find it in soil, and it has a lot of virulence. And then you can also aerolize it, making it dispersible through the air. So that puts it at the top of the list. And of course, if you come into contact with anthrax that has been vaporized or aerolized, it gets into the lungs and can kill you. So it can be deadly. So it's a number one concern in terms of bioagents that can be used.
So it mostly attacks the respiratory system. I mean, I've heard about it, and for clarity, my background, I view this through the lens of the documentary The Rock, which I don't know if you've seen. It was with Sean Connery and Nicolas Cage, and they were looking for the
I remember that. Yeah.
Yes, the string of pearls configuration. I just assume in my mind that was anthrax, and it bubbles the skin. And so is it largely a respiratory attack, and it just shuts down your ability to process oxygen?
No, it's not normally that. You normally can get it through your skin, through contact. But if it's weaponized, which means making it easy to disperse and hard to detect, that's when it becomes dangerous, because you can get it. Inhalation anthrax is the most deadly form of getting anthrax. So in the case of the anthrax attacks that we had, it was put into such fine granular spores that they were in the air, so you can actually breathe them in. So somebody knew what they were doing. But normal anthrax you can get through the skin, and it would make you sick, but it wouldn't probably kill you if you got treatment right away. But when you inhale it in your lungs, that's when it becomes deadly. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So how did this how did this scientist get rolled up the first time, and then why was he let go?
Well, as you're aware, our reasoning for invading Iraq was because they had WNDs.
Right.
So we went in on March of 2003, and that was our driving force. That was our reason to do it.
So check this out. Here's an interesting tie-in for you. I was part of the task force that actioned the #1 chem bio target in Iraq the first night of the war in full
No kidding.
MOP level 4 gear. And it was a fucking agricultural school with zero trace of any biological weapons whatsoever.
Okay, that's cool. That's pretty cool. I just learned something, man. Awesome. Yeah.
It was less awesome. MOP level 4 with night vision goggles on while you're getting shot at. I thought I knew what shitty felt like. That really sucked.
Oh, I bet it did. I bet it did. Yeah. And of course, you're worried about catching something, right? You're just like, geez. But anyway, getting back to your question, yeah, we invaded Iraq under the premise that Saddam Hussein had WNDs. He was a dangerous guy, and we had to take him out. But when we got in there, and days passed, and weeks passed, and months passed, we couldn't find any, and that became a concern. And so the press was brutal. They were brutal. They started attacking George Bush and saying, "Hey, we've got our men and women coming home in flag draped coffins, and where's the WMDs? What's the?" And so they were pretty brutal on him. So what that entailed was a great deal of pressure on others within the government to find them. And so that's what happened. And my guy got hooked up. He got arrested in June of 2003. He was thrown in prison and harshly treated for the purposes of finding some traces of WMD to justify why we were there. So that's how he got rolled up the first time. Yeah.
Okay. And then obviously when he was not obviously, I would assume when he was let out, probably your top 3 goal, if not #1 goal, would be to not repeat that experience. So I'm going to assume that he probably went underground. How did you find this guy?
Well, it was typical investigative work, find a person who knows a person who knows a person who might be able to get in touch with the guy. It was that type of stuff. And then keeping track of other scientists who he might hook up with, because they had a collaboration there. Some of these people worked together and they stayed in contact with each other. And I worked with a program through the State Department called ICSI, the Iraqi Interim Center for Science and Industry. It was a program that our government instituted to try to keep track of all these scientists, because our concern was we had all these people with WMD skills that are now displaced. Because all the places that they worked at, we bombed them out of existence. So they're out there floating around. What are they going to be doing? Could they go to work for the bad guys? Could they, transfer their skills to other people, to bad actors? So we were very concerned about that. So I worked with that program, and that was a good way to keep track of some of these scientists, and that allowed me to make connections to eventually get to Thamer. But my concern was he wouldn't want to talk with us, and I couldn't blame him, because he had been thrown in prison for 2.5 years, and it was pretty brutal, brutal experience for him, given the pressure to find the WMDs. And then there was a promise by the government when we learned about his skill set. We had actually sent some bureau guys, FBI guys, and polygraph guys to go visit him, and there was some conversation. And he agreed to help us, and they would release him. But for some reason, that never transpired, and he was eventually released from prison and sent out into this absolutely horrible environment. Obviously, the war was going on, but there was another war that was taking place, and it was by the jihadis and the insurgents, who had a program to kill or capture every one of the scientists in the country that had skills that could help them. So they wanted these guys to come over to their side to work for them. And the ones that didn't, they just basically assassinated them. And there literally were hundreds of scientists who were killed and assassinated during this period of time. And so he had a target on his back. He was afraid of being kidnapped or being killed. So that's what caused him to go underground and to try to keep ahead of these bad guys. And literally, they were just being killed every single day. They were just walking into their places where they worked and just assassinating them. And the strategy was that they knew they couldn't beat us militarily, so they adopted this policy of killing all of the brain power in the country. So if you don't want a new government to be successful, because they felt that the U.S. government was going to be, the new Iraqi government was going to be a puppet of the U.S. So one of the ways to prevent the new government from being successful is to kill all the scientists and the brain power. So they went on a mission to do that.
I don't want to give away too much in the book, but clearly you were able to find this individual, and he was able to provide what you were talking about, the low-level production techniques. How valuable were those insights?
I would say that they were very valuable. A lot of the stuff was very technical, and the information that he told us was placed in a classified report. So I can't talk about those specifics and the details, and most of the people in your audience wouldn't understand the technical part of it. But it was a valuable.
Let me go ahead and put myself in that category.
Yeah, it was very, very valuable to have his insights into the things that we just didn't know about. And so I think our program was enhanced by having him on our side. And he continued to work for us for a number of years, by the way.
What does his life look like now? Do you have any idea where he's at and what he's up to?
Yeah, I do. I still maintain contact with him because, it's interesting because the assignment that I went on, obviously the main mission was to find this guy, extract his information, get him into an environment where he would be willing to share this. But we had a lot of pushback against it by our own government, by the way, which is a whole nother aspect. But over time, I just kind of got to know this guy, and I realized that he wasn't my enemy. He was a person like me. He was working for the government, just trying to raise his family and do the right thing, and got caught up in events, beyond his control. And in Saddam's regime, you do what you're told to do, and if you don't, you could wind up in some serious problems. So whatever his assignment was, and he was put in charge of their anthrax programs as well as other programs. But as time went on, I got to know the guy, and I just realized that he wasn't my enemy, and I had some doubts about our existence and why we're there and the purpose of all of that and all of the carnage, and you certainly can speak to that went on. And so we actually enemies became friends because, when I first started this case, I was an angry dude, man. I mean, I was at 9/11, and standing on the graves of 3,000 people will set you down a dark path of anger and revenge. And I wasn't the only one. All Americans were just devastated by what happened there. And then, of course, we worked 12-hour shifts, and it was just disheartening that we couldn't save anybody. And when we finished working, they put us on a ship for a bit because we just couldn't have any rooms available. But you turn the television on at night and watch, children and parents and brothers, sisters, mothers, fathers just plead for any information on the whereabouts. It was heartbreaking. So I was one angry dude. I wanted revenge, and of course, my time in the military had come and gone, and I was a Secret Service agent. So, but I was angry about it, and then later on, they assigned me to find find a guy that I felt was my enemy because we were fighting Iraq. We were at war with them. Our troops and soldiers are being killed there. So I looked at it, but things changed for me over time as I got to know this guy, and we actually wound up becoming friends.
I don't want to give away too much information on him. Is he still living in Iraq, or has he moved on?
No, he's here in the United States.
Okay.
Yeah.
Probably
We brought it.
safer environment.
Yes. Without a doubt.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's still a powder keg over there, with the Iranian influence in Iraq right now. So that's always you know, ready to explode at any moment. So
Well, it brings me to my next question. It's interesting you bring up cyber. I've had quite a few guests on talking about cyber, and it's a real issue. I mean, whether it's scams or, things like power grid being associated with electronic controls and the ability to be exploited or shut down or, ransomware or all of this stuff. Where it's not like we're decelerating towards an electronically based world. We're like fifth gear, gas pedal smashed to the floor at just breakneck pace. So I think it is important that we focus on those things, but I do worry that the soup du jour of the day will take attention off and then funding off of things like bioterrorist attacks. And I would just hope that it's not, counterterrorism, I know was a term that was discussed prior to 9/11, but then 9/12, it became the marquee of what we have doing. I hope, and I'm wondering what your thoughts are. Is it possible to keep it on the forefront without actually surviving or experiencing one of these attacks? What do you think it would take to shift it back to focus?
Well, I certainly hope the COVID-19, opened up some eyes and will shift it back to that focus because we can see what an unchecked virus can do. So I certainly hope that that's the case. But we in the United States tend to always be a reactive country. We react after things happen. And the same thing with 9/11. I mean, I remember flying on airplanes when I was a Secret Service agent when you walk into the cockpit because the pilot would want to meet you. I mean, just the door's wide open. I'm sitting there and I would hate it because, you try to keep who you are quiet, but the flight attendant would come back and say, oh, the captain wants to meet you. And I go, oh, God, so I had to walk up there, but you open the door, walk right in. And of course, it took 9/11 for us to harden the cockpit. So we're a very reactive society. But getting back to your question about cyber, yeah, cyber is a real concern for us, and right now it's our number one threat to the United States, and people don't realize that in the United States we have 16 elements of critical infrastructure, and that being water supply, our food supply, our transportation supply, chemical, our electrical grid, and so forth. I won't name all 16, but those are the bigger elements of our critical infrastructure. Uh, and over 70% of those are in the hands of private industry. People aren't aware of that. Our food supply, chemical plants, these are in the hands of private companies. So the level of security that they're afforded is different, and it's the same thing with cyber. So the level of cyber protection that these entities have is all different. It doesn't come under the control of the government. So that's a big issue for us because we want to try to make certain that all of these various elements of our critical infrastructure, all 16 elements of it, are properly protected. But we have a lot of vulnerabilities. I mean, we're a target-rich environment in this country. There's no question about it. And so we need to focus. And cyber is big right now, and that is gaining all of our attention, all of the resources, training, bringing on more cyber experts to do that, because the bad guys, as I mentioned, have figured out that, hey, I can get at the end of this keyboard and create a lot of problems just from here. But as you mentioned, does it take away from the other things that we're doing? And I guess you have to prioritize some things, right? So cyber is the issue right now, but I certainly hope that it doesn't take our attention away from other things like bioterrorism.
Given your experience, what you know, and the depth of knowledge that you have in this world, how concerned are you personally about the US's vulnerability to bioterrorism?
Uh, well, I'm concerned because having worked in it and having seen what some of the capabilities are and some of the programs, most people are not aware of that, of what's going on around the world and how many, like right up here at Fort Detrick, we have a BSL-4 facility that's in Maryland. Yeah, they're working with some nasty stuff up there. And most people are just not aware of it. But yeah, I'm concerned about it, not only through a deliberate release, but accidental release, which is what COVID-19 was. So I'm concerned about it, but there's a camp. It's interesting, Annie. That's a very good question because there's one camp that says, listen, biological terrorism is so uncontrollable that even the bad guys won't want to mess with it. And I remember when I was working on this, we picked up some intel from the Mideast that there was conversations that some of the powers to be basically told their folks, listen, don't mess with this stuff because it's too uncontrollable. And there is some truth to that. Now, I know, for example, the Japanese used it against the Chinese in World War II. They poisoned 1,000 wells. They introduced cholera, all kinds of different things, experimented on people, but it got out and killed thousands of their own troops. But so there is that one camp that says even they won't mess with it. However, I have a different mindset because I've looked around the world and we've seen organizations like terrorist organizations like ISIS and some of the barbarity and the things that they've done in terms of decapitating people, burning people alive, all of this stuff. And then, of course, the horrors of October 7th, killing children and babies. So my mind is, do I want to count on the fact that I think these people are of sound enough mind that they wouldn't do something like this? No, I wouldn't want to hang my hat on that.
I mean,
And, yeah.
some tactics that they use, whether it be vehicle-borne IEDs or people who are willing enough to strap on a suicide vest or a suicide belt, they're willing to throw it all away, everything that they could be and everything they could ever do for their beliefs. Somebody willing to blow themselves into, to atomize themselves with an explosive vest, I don't think is going to have an issue walking into a room. And then again, I don't know, in my mind, based off of my advanced research in movies, pop a lid off a vial and then like everybody dies.
Yeah.
It's been proven that they're willing to sacrifice everything that they could be for their beliefs. And for that person, oh, hey, this is so dangerous, we shouldn't mess with it. Like, they don't care about that.
No, they don't. I mean, if you're willing to decapitate somebody, kill a baby, kill a child, burn people alive, yeah, using a biological weapon. And the other thing too, they don't have to use it in a way that is, produces mass casualties and mass deaths around the world and kills millions of people. There's low-level things they can do, screwing with our water, screwing with our food supply, agriculture, cattle, and things like that. There was a group in the 1980s. It was interesting. They wanted to affect a local election. I think it was up in Oregon. And so they grabbed some salmonella and they went around to all these restaurants. Yeah. And they introduced salmonella into all of the restaurants and all the salad bars.
That documentary is spectacular. Yeah. Wild, Wild Country. I've watched it several times. Yeah.
Yeah. And they wound up sickening 800 people. And of course, they didn't find out that it was deliberately done until about a year later when one of the guys confessed to it. So there's lots of ways that they can hit us on a low level that they may be willing to do. And of course, when they do that, it causes us to, millions of dollars and all kinds of things going on with us. And it accomplishes its goal, right? Which is to scare people. That's what terrorism is all about, to frighten people to the point where they're going to do what you want them to do or not do. So you can accomplish your goal by low level attacks. And, so that's what concerns me as well.
Okay. Well, I know we're bumping up against the end of our time here, Stephen. Maybe the best way to end it is let people know where they can get your book.
Well, it's available every place where they sell books, Barnes & Noble, Amazon, all of those places. So if you Google it, Gray Bird of Baghdad, or my name, Stephen Philip Monteiro, will come up and they'll be able to get the book. So it's available where all books are sold, right?
Stephen, thank you so much for your time, man. I really appreciate it.
Oh, you're welcome, man. It's great meeting you and continued success with your podcast, man.
Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you enjoyed this week's episode. Be sure to check out Stephen's book, The Gray Bird of Baghdad. Thank you again for listening to Change Agents, an Ironclad original, presented by Firecracker Farm. We'll be back next week with an all-new episode and an all-new guest. See you then.
We're excited to bring you the first product in collaboration with Ironclad Originals, the Reasonable Fear SEC Pack. Inspired by the upcoming Borderlands Special Series Reasonable Fear, where host Vince Vargas takes a deep dive into organized crime on the border. The SEC Pack includes an 8-watt ham radio, 2 tourniquets, a flashlight, first aid essentials, military-grade IFAK, and a Faraday bag. Whether you're going off the grid or planning your next road trip, the Reasonable Fear SEC bag is an essential piece of gear to have. Survive, Evade, Communicate are key components of this carefully curated kit. It can act as a standard fanny pack or for low-vis day-to-day situations or as an overt addition to your plate carrier. You decide how to scale the SEC bag based on your needs. Carry confidently, knowing that you have medical essentials for survival, covert tools for falling off the grid, and a way to communicate when everyday tech fails you. Survive, evade, and communicate when situations take a turn for the worst. Available now at thisisironclad.com.